Welcome, everyone. I'm Fran Schoenwetter, Director of Content Marketing with Informa Health and Nutrition and Food and Beverage Insider. I'm your host and moderator today. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us for our webinar, Avoiding Unconscious Incompetence in CBD Innovation. The webinar today is brought to you by Caliper Ingredients and Food and Beverage Insider. A little bit about Caliper. Caliper Ingredients develops, manufactures, and distributes Caliper CBD, a proprietary suite of standardized, clean label, shelf-stable formulations of water-soluble, hemp-derived cannabinoids, including CBD and other cannabinoids. Caliper CBD is produced according to standard commercial food manufacturing processes and is designed for scalable manufacturing, blending effectively into multiple product applications, including food and beverages. Joining us today are Keith Woelfel, who is the Director of Research and Development at Caliper Foods, and later on in our webcast for Q&A will be Justin Singer. He is the CEO and co-founder of Caliper Foods. Before we begin, I'd just like to give you all a few words about the webinar technology. Some of you have been on this platform before, some of you it may be new for. So the platform does allow you to watch the event the way you prefer to watch it. You can customize your webcast console. You can move windows around, drag on the title bar, or resize your windows by clicking on the lower right corner of any window. You will notice a toolbar at the bottom of the console. The buttons allow you to open and close a few widgets on your screen. That will also include supporting documents and the presentation information that you'll see during this webinar. There will be, one of the documents has some links to some added resources as well, so be sure to visit the added resources. Our webinar Q&A today will be live. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation. You'll write them in within the Q&A area in the console. We'll respond to those at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your specific question, we will make every effort to do so, but we will respond via email to your questions. Technical webinar questions will be answered to you directly during the presentation. Again, I just want to remind you all that you can download presentation slides and the information, and don't forget to submit your questions. And with that, we're going to move on to our presentation topic, and just a little bit of information here. Just related to FDA cannabis regulatory guidance, things are changing. And I think that most people on this webinar are quite aware of the flux that we're experiencing in the hemp CBD environment. But we're also changing the way product developers are approaching and incorporating hemp CBD into food and beverage products. So today we'll be discussing some of the lessons learned from developing food and beverage products with hemp CBD and how to prepare for long-term success within this industry. And with that, on with our presentation. Keith.
Fran, thank you. So today we'd like to cover off on a couple things. First, who is Caliper? Second, what about working with CBD as a product? What are some of the areas you have to be very careful of? Third, what are some of the project-killing misconceptions around CBD that we've seen that we'd like to present to you? Fourth, recommending a process that you can use as a stage gate process to ask the right questions along the way to help your project run smoothly and run successfully. And lastly, we'd like to end with the Q&A hosted by our CEO and co-founder, Justin Singer. So as Fran mentioned, some housekeeping items. This webinar is roughly going to be about 25-30 minutes plus Q&A at the end. So please ask questions, use the chat feature on your screen, send us questions throughout the presentation, and Justin will address them towards the end. Questions that we do not get to, we will follow up with you directly. This presentation is being recorded and it will be available on the Food and Beverage Insider web as well as Caliper Ingredients websites. A little background about me. I'm Keith Woelfel, Director of R&D at Caliper. I have been in product development now for 30 plus years, and I have a passion for applying sciences to the product development process to create products from concept all the way through launch, from both working on small incubator products to large-scale billion-dollar brands. My passion to health and wellness is what led me to get into the cannabinoid industry with Caliper over 4 years ago. A little background about Justin Singer, our CEO and co-founder. Justin has a passion for building and running businesses the right way, process-driven, methodical, taking a long-term approach. So this is our 4th webinar that we're looking at education series. If you like this webinar, I encourage you to look at the other webinars, starting with the ABC of CBD, which talks about the 101s of CBD as an ingredient and as an industry. Secondly, we talk about sources of quality within the supply chain of CBD. And lastly, we did a most recent seminar on what does the regulated space look like today and where do we believe it's going to go with tomorrow. So who is Caliper? Caliper produces food products at scale. We believe in doing them right. We believe in doing them safely. We believe that regulation and compliance matter, and that it matters a lot. And you need to build a competent team to deliver against that. So we are a CPG company first, and we recruited very heavily on players or leaders in the marketplace or space that have deep CPG understanding and experience, coming from companies like Mead Johnson, Church & Dwight, Danone, Safeway, Mars, Eurofins. And it's really important that you have the right players in place with the right level of experience to really enable you to innovate quickly and innovate and execute very well, execute cleanly. What sets us apart? From an R&D lens, we are a CPG company that specializes in cannabinoids. We are not a cannabinoid company that grows, extracts, and happens to make some food products along the way. We believe in deep science, really powers well execution for products. We are a company that believes manufacturing processes matter a lot for consistency, so much so that we own all our processes internally. We're a company that believes that quality assurance programs are really important so you can define what your raw material supply chain needs to deliver for quality and food safety. We believe if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So to that end, we've invested heavily on developing analytical methodology, particularly around cannabinoid profiles, using HPLC analysis to making sure we can validate the entire raw material supply chain, conversion, and raw material or finished goods that go out to the marketplace. And lastly, we are a B2B based company, so we're here to help. We're here to support our customers. We'll support with our sales team, our marketing team, R&D, quality, and manufacturing. All right, so what else sets us apart is clinical research. We believe when consumers reach for our products that we want to make sure it's properly ingested and actually give the intended benefit that they're looking for. So to that end, we focused in on observed blood levels versus subjective reporting. So we partnered up with Colorado State University to run a series of absorption trials, pharmacokinetic studies, if you will. The first set of studies looked at water-soluble versus fat-based CBD. CBD in its native form is fat-based. It is not lipid-soluble. Most fat-based products are poorly absorbed. The WHO has done an analysis on CBD and found that as little as only 6% of CBD can be absorbed in its fat-based format. By taking that same format, making it water-soluble, and say dosing, administering up to 30 milligrams of CBD, what you find through pharmacokinetic studies that the fat-based version can take up to 3 hours before it's fully absorbed. And it's also not well absorbed. Taking the same 30 milligrams, making it water-soluble, we're seeing absorption rates increase dramatically. Instead of being absorbed in a matter of hours, it's being absorbed in a matter of minutes, measurable within 10 minutes with peak absorption as fast as 45 minutes. The other benefit about being water-soluble, we're seeing between 400 and 500% increase for the amount that's actually brought into your bloodstream. Driving this further is if you know water-soluble is increasing bioavailability, can you actually work with other emulsifiers that are food grade, clean label, GRAS listed to really amp up the bioavailability further? And that's a study we have ongoing right now. We're due to get results at the end of this month. In addition, we're working with Rutgers University for CBD as a topical application, CBD to address pain management, CBD to address anti-inflammatory as a topical. So we're working with Rutgers to really understand how CBD is being pulled through the dermal layers and how that's addressing the need states of consumers. CBD is an agricultural byproduct like any other. So what is all the fuss? When CBD was regulated by the Farm Bill in December of 2018, it regulated the supply side of the equation. It did not regulate the consumer piece of it, the space that deals with food, beverages, supplements. And why do we have food and supplement regulation? Well, sometimes it pays to look at the basics. One, making sure food manufacturers are safe and prevent foodborne illnesses. Two, making sure ensure what's on the bottle is on the label, and what's on the label is in the bottle. And lastly, to ensure what's sold can be recalled. Good traceability. Unfortunately, today's CBD market falls short. Compliance is more on the honor system, not the legal system. It's a framework that we're living in today. So as responsible food manufacturers, you have the onus to prioritize good GMP adherence and food safety, because that matters for consumer safety and trust. Making sure labels are being properly and accurately labeled. Making sure claims, all product claims, are being substantiated. Again, this should be obvious. In the space, it is not. So moving on to project killing misconceptions. From an R&D lens, there's 6 of them. Misconception number 1 is a legal misconception. And that misconception is you have to use full spectrum or broad spectrum CBD because CBD isolate is a drug. That's not true. CBD in any form is a drug in the eyes of the FDA. The FDA has never distinguished whether it's isolate or broad spectrum, that one is more legal than the other. Misconception number 2, analytical results. You got third-party results, you're good to go. The reality is there is tremendous lab-to-lab variability in both accuracy and how it's being tested because the industry is not regulated. The critical areas aren't well defined. So residual solvents, for example, what's being tested, how it's being tested, limits of quantification are not being noted. Heavy metals is another key area. Hemp is a great bioremediator. That's wonderful if you want to clean up the soil. That's not great if you want to keep lead out of your products. So it's very important to pay strict attention to the details that your labs you're working with can give you very good levels of quantification that you can stand behind. Misconception number 3. You just went to the trouble of sourcing USD organic CBD. So therefore, your product can be labeled as such. The reality is USDA and FDA rules prohibit CBD from being labeled as an organic food. This one is incredibly confusing, it's incredibly muddled, and I highly encourage to bring your questions to Justin at the end of this Q&A. Misconception number 4, substantiation. If a vendor makes a claim in writing, they must have substantiation to back it up. Because of the lack of oversight in the CBD space, claims run rampant. It's amazing all the things that CBDs claim to cure and alleviate. Dig deep. The broader the claim or the more stronger the claim, make sure the science supports it. Typically, we see a correlation. These strong claims are very poorly substantiated scientifically. Lots of examples are on CBD will cure this or it'll cure that. If you look deeper, it turns out the study is quoting measuring in mice, not in humans, for example, or bioavailability that was done on humans was done on a different product, not even was even done on CBD. Misconception number 5, disclosure. This is another really big one. No one would ever fail to disclose ingredients because that's just basic consumer safety. This one is rampant in the CBD space. CBD in its native form, again, is fat-based. So if you put it in water, it's going to separate out immediately. It has to have some sort of emulsifier, typically some sort of carrying agent to get CBD to become water soluble. And if you look at most products in the marketplace, they're either mislabeled or not even labeling at all what's being used. So many waters, for example, that you'll see in the marketplace will show water as an ingredient and nano hemp extract, which means nothing. CBD has to have emulsifiers with it and to be water-based. And it's so pervasive for the mislabeling industry that it actually begs the question, why? Why are so many vendors purposely leaving off, either intentionally or unintentionally leaving this off the equation? And I really believe this boils down to 3 different reasons. One, some of the ingredients that are being used to emulsify CBD is not clean. The labels are not consumer friendly. So if you're not being regulated to force to use it, it's easier for you to keep these off the label, just so you're not scaring away any consumers. Two, there's also a misconception that natural flavors, for example, labels as natural flavors. All the emulsifiers that are present aren't labeled. So why can't I use that for my water-soluble CBD? Seems to make sense. We disagree. And then lastly, because the space is so innovative and fast-moving, many companies have taken a protective shield on their intellectual property. And they feel if they're fully labeling what's going on in their product, it's giving away a little bit around the secret sauce that they've developed. Again, everything that's in your product should be fully transparent, fully labeled. Misconception number 6, generalizing. Generalizing that smaller is always better for bioavailability. There's lots of grains of truth to this, but it does not tell the whole story. CBD, to make water soluble, is typically solubilized with a carrying oil. The carrying oil is then broken down to very small pieces and wrapped around it with an emulsifier. And as you make the product smaller, it does tend to increase bioavailability, but it comes at a significant cost. Smaller means the inherent CBD bitterness, the bitterness that's present in CBD, goes up an enormous level. So something that was bitter to begin with now becomes incredibly bitterness. And with that, you can actually wind up rooting the taste of your products. In addition, the type of emulsifier, so clean label, grass-listed emulsifier that you use can actually make a very big difference for really increasing the amount of bioavailability independent of particle size. So now I'd like to move over to a framework that we use that we find very helpful. We'd like to share that with you and look for the lens of lessons learned. And we'd like to take our CBD process, because we know in this industry you have to move incredibly fast. Having a stage gating process we find is actually a very good enabler to move very quickly. Because again, good processes really help drive successful product development. So we've broken this into 5 different stage gates that I'd like to take you through each one, starting first with the investigate stage gate. So starting first with the investigate stage gate. This is probably the most important stage in your project. And so that I'm going to spend extra time on it for the questions that you want to ask your team. First off, what is the product you want to deliver? What's the benefits you want to deliver? Who's your intended audience? What do your retailers look like? It's very important at this stage is figure out who your key stakeholders are internally and making sure you have the conversation right out of the gate. Does legal's opinion on how to launch this product match with marketing, with R&D, with quality, with manufacturing? The more you ask the right questions at this stage, the more you enable yourself through the project to be successful. Ask the question is, what's the right product format for your project, for consumers, for technical execution? We've seen product formats that make sense from a marketing standpoint because it's a green field or green space, but from technical execution, you're putting CBD in an area where it just cannot be technically stable. Another question to ask is, what consumer benefits and claims are you looking to deliver? What level of naturalness or natural label are you looking for? What aspects of your brand are you looking to support? What promises to consumers are you looking to deliver for CBD? And are you able to support these claims to substantiate them? Another consideration to ask yourself, have you discussed CBD with your manufacturer? Many CBD manufacturers, or many manufacturers in the space are still not open to working with CBD-based products. Another area to look with or ask your question is, who are going to be your retailers that you want to partnership up with, and what needs and demands are they going to need from you for packaging, for CMAs, and for validation? Stage gate number 2, questions to ask yourself. Are you doing due diligence properly with your supply chain? The supply chain is still developing in the CBD space. Typically, you cannot just lock yourself into one vendor for CBD. Typically, it's multiple vendors. Ask yourself the right questions is your CBD vendor providing you the level of quality and consistency that they can back batch after batch after batch? Many vendors are making lots of claims. Well, make sure it's due diligence to making sure you're able to, that they can walk the walk, talk the talk. And there's no better way than getting on an airplane and meeting with your vendors, making sure, seeing their facilities firsthand that they're delivering the goods. It's another area to really start validating that you have the right lab partners. Again, because it's so critical to making sure you're getting good, reliable data as you develop your products and launch your products. There's also, in the development stage, you'll find that there's many trade-offs. There's no Goldilocks. If you're developing a product where you're being asked to develop a clear water, clean tasting, high levels of CBD, all natural, and great stability, turns out it's going to be almost impossible to have all those variables. So it's an area to be very intentful. What are you going to balance between taste, shelf life, clarity, and label claims? Another trade-off in a space for development, the space is moving so quickly. Normally, expect 1 to 2 years to develop a product because it's an innovative space. Most times you're going to be developing products in a matter of months. So what trade-offs are you looking to work with to optimize for speed? Ask the questions as how stable physically your product's going to be, chemically, are you able to substantiate your claims, product quality, what packaging needs, and have you found the right lab testing partner? Moving on to the scale-up stage. Assuming your product is designed locked at this stage and you're starting to test drive it, it's a great time to really look and ask yourself the question, is your product now meeting design criteria? Is manufacturing able to design or deliver what you need for QC requirements, for potency, for consistency? For example, is your heat treatment process or your blending stages, your filling operations truly able to deliver the label claims that you're making for CBD content? It's also very important to continue to verify, verify, verify. It's such a new industry. You'll still find that you get one lot of CBD that worked out great. What about your second lot? What about your third lot? What about your fourth lot? What about supplier A versus supplier B? And when it's at scale, you really start seeing how close or how accurate your supply chain can be against what you spec'd out for food safety, what you spec'd out for heavy metals, residual solvents, flavor, et cetera, et cetera. So moving on to the implement stage, this is a great time to making sure the product that you're developing at scale is meeting design expectations. Making sure you're able to provide each batch with a level of consistency and food safety as intended. Making sure design guardrails are being met. Design guardrails around sensoring, for example, or organoleptic properties. It's a great time to really look at labeling. Has your legal team reviewed everything one last time before it goes out the door? Are you able to make sure your CBD content that you are labeling goes all the way through for min-max targets, all the way through consumers, through the supply chain? Are you labeling with the future state in mind for where we believe FDA will provide greater degrees of oversight? And lastly, are you being cognizant to marketing terms that are being used right now in the industry that are not science or legal-based terms, making sure you're using them in a way that's not confusing to consumers or retailers? Examples of some of these terms that are widely used in the space: nanoemulsion, entourage effect, broad spectrum, full spectrum. Moving on to the launch stage, you want to ask the questions: did your production consistently meet specified design targets and quality attributes? Are retailers getting what they need from you? Proper validation through proper C of A's, good distribution, good shelf life, good quality. You're going to want to ask your consumers, are they getting the benefit that they intended? Will they buy your product again? Are you going to get very strong repeat purchases? Is your customers going to be your champion for your own product? Are they going to be the one who's going to be word of mouth and really seeking the praise of the product? Launching and marketing new CBD products, there's a lot of information here, so stay tuned. We will provide you a future webinar by Caliper Foods. With that, we'd like to turn this over to Justin Singer for Q&A.
All righty. Thank you so much. Keith, really. So we've got plenty of time for Q&A today with Justin, who's on the line, again, CEO of Caliper Foods. And I want to just remind everybody to submit your questions through the Q&A widget and really use this Q&A opportunity to ask questions of Caliper, ask questions about production for food and beverage and quality. And I want to discourage you from using that for promotional purposes because it's not really seen by our audience, but we're taking care of looking at all of your questions. So with that, welcome, Justin.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'll make sure you're on the line.
That's great. Yep, we are here.
Great. So what Caliper Foods is providing really specializes in food and beverage. And, you know, a subject matter that's really, that's been really on my mind quite a bit is related to clinical data, clinical support. There haven't been a lot of companies investing really in clinical data at this point, although, you know, the investment doesn't have to be extremely high and the payoff can be very high. You know, given the state of the market right now, where things are not really clear where regulations are going, why is Caliper making solid investments in clinical data?
Honestly, to us, it's a quality issue. We're kind of fascinated with the question of like, why do some people have that CBD experience, which isn't a psychotropic effect like THC, and why do some people not? What is the format that really helps people? Is there a format that can help people or a larger group of people have that experience? You know, you sell caffeine, everyone understands what that's supposed to feel like. With CBD, we're still questioning, like, what is the blood level that actually gets you to an experience that it meets expectations, that meets brand promise? And you have to really understand the linkage between what goes in your body and what is absorbed by your body before you can even start approaching the question of what's the right dose. So, or efficacy, which is where everybody really wants to leap to, is how effective is CBD as it relates to certain conditions. We're trying to sit on the building blocks. I think it's quite obvious why people aren't investing in this. You know, we have the luxury of being able to do it, but it's not free by any stretch of the imagination. It's a long-term thing. It also requires a lot of work with credible partners, and without clear FDA regulation, you know, there's a lot up in the air in terms of whether there's going to be a payoff to this investment. We obviously believe there will be, and we believe it's the right thing to do regardless of whether it's clear on the other side. So that has been our goal from the beginning.
Yeah, when you look at the end product extract, right now there's not a lot of clarity coming from FDA. As a matter of fact, there's likely to be some changes even in terms of acceptable THC levels in extracts. And I guess I'd like to know how you're focusing on what goes on the label for your customers' products. You know, how do you support your customers in putting on the label related to specifically what actually is inside the product?
You know, we believe that in the absence of FDA clarity, it's incumbent on any responsible manufacturer to do what the principles underlying food safety and consumer safety would indicate, which is to pay close attention to your product so you're not putting things in there that are undisclosed, that people don't know about, that do have bioactive effect. And that what you are saying you put on there is actually in there, so people can know that from time to time that they consume it, that they are getting the same thing. That requires a lot of work around analytical verification. Keith is here with me, and I'm sure he loves talking about just how variant the test results can be, especially when you get into complex food systems. You know, I think we're only now starting to get good at testing things like isolates, let alone a beverage. We have been developing methods and trying to validate those methods and finding gremlins in those methods for years now, both from starting on THC and on CBD now as well.
Well, and because hemp cannabinoids are lipid soluble, can the kind of product that you put them in create a variance in terms of how the body is actually uptaking those nutrients, so to speak?
Yeah, this is key. The variance is with being fat-based, you're going to see, again, slower absorption and lesser absorption as a general rule of thumb for being fat-based.
Yeah, that's as a general rule, but it is also, even within the soluble stuff, like we have tested different formulations, different base formulations of water soluble in our latest PK study, and we've seen different absorption curves. So and they're not directly correlated to particle size, for instance. Some of our better performing products aren't necessarily the smallest particles. There are a lot of open questions about what absorbs and what doesn't at what levels, and we've also seen tremendous interpersonal variation as well. So some people just straight up don't absorb CBD, and that would probably indicate they don't absorb other cannabinoids. But the averages belie a lot of interesting information once you get down below the average into what the constituents are.
And as a build, when you take something CBD on an empty stomach versus with food, there seems to be a trend that with food actually is slowing down the absorption time, but it's actually increasing overall bioavailability. And that stands true whether it be water-based CBD or fat-based CBD. So depending if you have a meal or not when you have CBD matters for overall absorption.
Well, this is interesting. It relates actually to a couple of questions for specific diameter and dilution when CBD is an emulsion. Are there different effective diameters, diameter for particulate within dilution?
I don't think there's a clear answer to that. I think that there are certain diameters that relate to things like visual clarity, and in terms of stability, that's obviously a factor. But in terms of absorption, I don't think you can draw a clear line there.
Yeah, if you had to do a rule of thumb, and this was stepping out a bit, saying 500 nanometers would be a starting point. You'd probably want to be to the left of that number for general.
But not too far to the left of it.
Right. Between 500, say, to about 100 or a little bit less. As you go smaller, it's going to increase bioavailability. But again, as you're going smaller, you're also increasing bitterness. Now, as you go smaller, if it's in a beverage, it does help with overall stability. So again, it's that balancing act. So, as a rough rule of thumb, and actually the other thing that matters is the shape of the curve. Typically, you want a really tight emulsion. We don't have any shifting to the right, because anything on the right to, say, 500 nanometers tends to have a destabilizing effect when it's in an actual, like an RTD beverage, which is different than bioavailability, but it affects the physical stability of the product. So again, to answer that question, it's not an easy one to answer. Say roughly between 500 to 100 is where you see most of your nanoemulsions for formulation reasons and for bioavailability reasons.
Yeah, although I know Keith has concerns about anything that's below 100 nanometers and when it starts crossing, or 50 nanometers and crossing the blood-brain barrier, which is just too understudied to really get into, in our opinion.
Right. Goes back to the need for more clinical evidence. So it's really, from a formulation standpoint, from a formulator standpoint, it's really a dance between bioavailability, the actual application. Is it a cookie or is it a beverage? What other nutrients are in that product, and then the flavor profile. So, yeah, I'm glad that someone asked that question. I mean, it's obviously not a one-size-fits-all, but also there are limitations in terms of what we think is appropriate regarding clarity and safety right now. What about the state by state? I mean, you're producing food, beverage products, and CBD regulations right now are, really, they vary, obviously, on a state-by-state basis today in the United States. What's the best way for a brand, a food manufacturer, to navigate that right now?
I mean, it's complex. First of all, there's a question of whether states actually have the authority to do this. The FDA has generally exerted oversight over the national food infrastructure, and for good reason. Foods cross state borders all the time. If you are going to take a state-by-state approach, the U.S. Hemp Authority just stopped keeping it updated, but it still is fresh as of today. They have a database where they pay attention to state-level regulations as it relates to CBD, and it is a patchwork, and that's putting it mildly. Generally speaking, we as a company tend not to want to try and find loopholes or in individual states, because we do view food as rightly under the purview of the FDA, even if they're not taking oversight yet. So we try and act as if, and we recommend the same to all of our customers, that if you can meet the FDCA, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, that's your best bet.
So, you know, you're looking out at the sea here of regulations from the lighthouse, you know, as a producer for many different companies. What are you, when you look out at the horizon there, when are you anticipating, I don't know that you can really answer this, but just from your point of view, when do you anticipate perhaps seeing some regulatory or regulation changes?
Oh, you know, that is the $1 million question, or the $1 billion question, as it is. So clearly, hemp is the driving force politically behind getting CBD regulations across the finish line. That is the reason why we don't believe that FDA can hold the line on just having CBD as a drug, is because they aren't controlling the manufacture, or even attempting to. Manufacture is widespread. It is across a number of states. It is part of the agricultural community, and the Senate Majority Leader comes from a hemp state. So we certainly believe all the politics are pushing towards getting this done. We also believe that the consumer safety angle just necessitates this. If you want to be a consumer safety advocate, then you want regulation. This Wild West environment is good for absolutely no one. There is a real need for people to have to hold liability for speaking truth or not. When will that happen? Well, we're in the midst of a couple of crises right now, and people's attention is focused elsewhere. We had a lot of hopes going into February, and there was a lot of movement on Capitol Hill on this issue, and it really looked like things were going to be moving in the spring. Obviously, everything got blown up. Now we're hopeful that something could come through. If, you know, the FDA could issue regulation, or we could actually get some executive leadership on this issue, hopefully next year. But it is hard to predict. All we do know is that we can predict the end. The timeline on it is the big question. But the end state is pretty much preordained. And unless we're going back to prohibition, you can't put this toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah, that's so true. It's only one way forward. We just don't know exactly which tributary, all the tributaries we're going to be facing here.
Yep.
Let's stay on the regulatory tributary right now with our questioning coming from the audience. We had a couple of related questions. Prop 65 in California, heavy metals, and what about warnings, or, you know, what does that look like for food and bev products with hemp extracts within them, and Prop 65?
I mean, I'm going to let Keith talk a little about Prop 65, but California has tied itself in knots over CBD in general. So Prop 65, I don't even think, even if you solve that, you still have California's local laws to deal with.
Yeah, and with Prop 65, we believe one of the main things we'll be looking at is the heavy metal analysis, particularly around the big four that we mentioned. Pesticides, you always have to be really careful, because there's just so many. I forget how many that Prop 65 is looking at. I'd say several hundred. We always get, you got to be very careful on that for testing, the right testing labs, making sure they're testing on all the right number of pesticides. But in general, Prop 65 I'm hearing more and more is most focusing with hemp around heavy metal analysis, less around pesticides, as far as areas of concern for violations.
Yeah. Well, you know, buyer be conservative, we'll say, you know.
Yes.
And test and test again. Let's talk about the claims side of regulations. I mean, in nutritional dietary supplements, of course, clinical trials are required behind the scenes if you're making any kind of specific health claims. There's a lot of work to be done in the hemp CBD market there today. Even before we get to a national standard with regulations. But what about with food products? I think that there's so many players out there on the brand side, little ones and big ones. The big ones are clear and conservative around FTC and FDA, but smaller brands may not be as clear about claims in food and on food labels related to putting CBD products or ingredients in their products. What kind of advice would you give them around what they can legally state on their labels?
I mean, my blanket advice when working with CBD today in the absence of FDA oversight is don't take risk while you're taking risk. You are taking the risk of working with CBD under the FDA's sanction, well, if not sanction, at least allowance. That's a clear regulatory risk. The FDA has made it very obvious that the claims risk is the one thing around CBD that they are most unlikely to accept. That has been the focus of every letter they have sent, every warning, all of their communications. And that's an easy one to do. Don't make health claims. Like, there's no need to. I think I've said quite often that the New York Times style section is doing all the heavy lifting a brand would need to explain what is CBD and why somebody would want it. The key thing is to deliver what you say you're delivering.
Yeah, right. And in terms of dosage and qualitatively, what it is. We had a question related to, formulating in a food product. If you put 25 milligrams in your food product, once it's finished and you've got other ingredients and dilution in there or other things that may, affect what a consumer is actually consuming on a per serving basis, might it be less? Might it only be 20 milligrams as opposed to the 25? How does that play itself out in formulation and dosage? I'm putting my fingers up in air quotes when I say dosage there, but how does that play out in formulation in terms of what a consumer can expect?
So this question I view as sort of coming from the producer's perspective. So traditionally, the manufacturer was responsible for claims of what they put into the package. So if I say this package of tea has 140 milligrams of caffeine in it, I'm responsible for that. I'm not necessarily responsible for what goes in the cup of brewed tea when the actual consumer consumes in the finished format. We are working with some customers now they've raised the level of what they expect to deliver to consumers to be 100% accurate, meaning that, like, if they say they're putting 20 milligrams, it's not just enough for them to put it in the package. They want it in the cup. They want it in the finished product the consumer actually consumes, and we want to work with them on that because that is different and that is difficult. The analytical methods around what are you actually putting into the cup is a very different method from what's in the dry product, for instance, in a brewed beverage like tea or coffee. Keith, do you have any more you want to add to that one?
Yeah, it begs a very interesting question. I mean, our viewpoint, where possible, try to say you're getting a 90% extraction efficiency from your product into the consumer's beverage, if you will. We'd like to see just label it up. So in other words, if you need to amp up 10% more to accommodate so consumers are getting what they're paying for, is the ideal scenario. This is not uncommon. We just had a conversation this morning about functional ingredients in gum and how that's always a challenge too, to making sure what goes in the product actually gets the consumer's body. But yeah, certainly challenging area to formulate against.
Well, when you're formulating to a particular potency for CBD, is the end product also tested for that potency? And are you also then testing for other cannabinoids in the finished product?
Yeah, Fran, to be actually more clear, test the finished product in that respect is relatively easy. Because if the label says, say, 25 milligrams that you're selling to consumers, that product, when it's tested, should declare 25 milligrams.
It's the difference is when it actually is put into its final format. So if it's brewed, like a brewed beverage is the obvious one, or like a beverage mix, then you've got to confirm that linkage held firm in that conversion. If you so choose. That is obviously, that's a choice for the manufacturer to make on what they want to be, what claims they want to make to the market, and how they want consumers to view them.
Do you have manufacturer partners? I was just going to ask you if you advise them to do so, or only if they ask you.
No, we advise them to, because absent FDA oversight, you've got to be very careful about paying attention to consumer suits. And one way to avoid that is just to give them a smaller attack space to look at. And there are plenty enough people whose products hit the shelves with degraded CBD contents way down low that make much juicier targets than people who actually focus on delivering exactly what they say they're going to deliver. So in a way, it's security through honesty. Through extreme
Well,
honesty.
and what about, you make a product that goes to shelf, how do you test for potency during for shelf life, potency and stability, and, to assure that, again, from the time it's manufactured to the time that it ends up in a consumer's hands, that they're getting that stable potency and stable quality that was originally produced.
I mean, you need a post-launch program. You should probably have a pre-launch program. We strongly recommend doing shelf stability testing at all times.
Well, I am not hearing the feed here. So since apparently I'm still on and I'm not hearing Justin, I'm not really sure why, but somehow I've lost my audio here. So I'm going to have to tie things up with a tidy ribbon, because we have gone through most of our key Q&A, and I hope that this is okay for you, Justin and Keith.
Hey, sorry,
they're back.
We're back. Apologies. We had an inbound call from Mom that accidentally switched over. Mothers have superpowers when it comes to conference calls.
My daughter called me during this too, but I told her you'll have to wait. So I'm glad that you're still here. So we're just going to give us another few minutes. Thank you so much for jumping right back in. I thought it was my line.
Yeah.
So it happened.
Sorry. To finish the question about shelf stability, we really encourage people to do pre-launch shelf stability testing. The important thing to remember is an accelerated protocol doesn't really exist yet because we don't have enough actual real world data. So you've got to actually put it in the finished container. You got to subject it to UV. You've got to subject it to the refrigeration conditions. And then you've got to make sure you're running samples on that over a period that meets your expiration or best by date. And then you've got to actually test that in real world conditions as well. We have seen this happen. I mean, look, we think there's a reason why certain products always tested 0 CBD, and it's not actually because they are complete frauds that they don't put the CBD in there. We think they're just not doing post-launch analysis and seeing the degradation that's happened. So you've got to have the program in place, and you've got to be willing to accept the results that you get from the analysis and make adjustments as needed.
Right. I mean, somebody asked a question about typical shelf life, and clearly there is no typical shelf life. You really have to look at your the application and the finished formulation and do the testing. Do you provide any of those services, or do you recommend third-party services for manufacturers to utilize for doing that kind of post-manufacturing testing?
We absolutely provide it. It's part of the entire sales process, and we, in fact, really don't like to work with people who don't want to do it. You want people who care about that quality standards and building those parameters around it as customers. Those are the people we like working with, the ones that care about compliance, the ones that want to do those programs. I mean, we have worked with customers in everything from developing shelf stability testing protocols to developing analytical methods for their end product that we then hand off to a third party to actually perform, but we can do a lot of the methods development in-house so that it makes it easier and we don't have this whole back and forth coming about why are my test results coming in low? Well, that lab has only ever tested biomass, so it's no surprise that they don't know how to test an RTD beverage.
And Fran, as a build, there's certain fruit systems that are much more just more stable in general for CBD. And for example, as you get lower pH, so much higher acid, it tends to have a protective effect for CBD. As you get away from that, you start getting more basic or more alkaline, we see a strong correlation where CBD is less stable. So there's definitely some good rule of thumbs for guidelines to create stable products. And you can also start seeing trend analysis early when you're running real live ambient shelf life. You know, if you look at 6 months, you see that it's a stable line. You can use some good extrapolation to see if you get 9 months or 12 months out of it. Is another tool that can be used.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, if you're a manufacturer today, seeing that there's opportunity in your product portfolio for perhaps adding CBD to some of your products, what do you think that a manufacturer should do today, right now, if they want to consider adding CBD to their food or beverage product?
I mean, I think an important thing to remember is the clearest piece of legal, the clearest legal interpretation in regards to CBD is that development is 100% legal. It's commercialization where you start running into issues. So there's no if you believe that CBD is going to be allowed in food and supplement, there's simply no reason not to start commercializing today, not to start developing today, because if you wait until you get the clarity on the commercialization side, then you are already subjecting yourself to a fear of missing out and all the dangerous dynamics that come with a rushed development with a bunch of people breathing down your neck saying, get this to market so we're not last. Right now, you can do the development. You can do it on a healthy schedule. You can validate the product on a good timeline. You can actually run a healthy process if you start today, and then you can be ready for when that clarity comes from FDA, which if you're on this conference call, I would assume that you believe that clarity is imminent. It's, again, just a matter of time. But there's just no legal reason that should hold you back from starting commercialization or starting development today. There are any number of reasons, but legal is not one of them.
Right, but take your time, do it the right way. Don't let FOMO guide your pacing. Make sure you're taking a step-by-step stage gate process to initiating.
Exactly. Do it once, do it right, do it on the right schedule.
And you'll be ready for what's coming down the pike. And you'll be able to do it and launch products with endurance out in the marketplace.
Exactly. Ultimately, we all believe that the best products win, but you need to get them there.
Yeah, as we're getting towards the top of the hour, I just want to kind of open up just more generally, just ask you where you think the biggest opportunities are going forward today, and just give you the opportunity to add anything here before we wrap up.
I mean, I think the biggest opportunity is mixing credibility with CBD. That has been the biggest problem to date. There was a rush to the marketplace last year where you had a bunch of people putting products out in the market that weren't very bioavailable, that were very commoditized, and that consumers weren't well educated about, which brands themselves didn't really market or push behind and help people understand what they were. That isn't a recipe for success. It's a recipe for a quick ride up and a quick ride down. There is no question that CBD actually is a bioactive product. That's usually the number one question when it comes to a supplement. Like, is this actually effective or is this just a placebo? At the dose level CBD has reached the market today, honestly, it's probably a placebo. I think the number has to climb up a bit, which means we got to do some work on the bitterness profile and understanding the pharmacokinetics, but it's not a question of whether there is effect here. Like with cannabinoids, these are products that have effect. At what levels and what effects those are open questions, and we're working towards them, but there's no question that this actually is doing something. So getting from here to a safe something, like you are standing behind a product that has true bioactive effect, which is the holy grail of a functional food and beverage. It is the thing that everyone wants it to be. You're talking about something that has the potential to be the counterpoint to caffeine if done correctly and well. The question is just how do we get from here to there, and that's going to require work. It's not just going to happen when you turn on a switch and put out crap products and let those go. You actually have to do the development on this to make it work. Keith, I know, loves to talk about how this parallels the work that he did in cocoa flavanols and all of the efforts around that and the time and effort that Mars put into researching, understanding it, and getting it to market, and getting it to market in the right way, which it finally has. But it's not like that just market appeared out of nowhere. It was built, and you need people to actually be devoted to building it.
And investing both money and time into getting to appropriate endpoints that support both efficacy and safety. Is there anything else, Keith, that you'd like to add before we close out the hour today? All good to go?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I would like to thank everyone for staying on the webinar. I had a little glitch there, but we're all good. And if we didn't get to your specific question, we have captured those, so we will make all efforts to respond to that. Caliper will provide intel for you, and there is some information about how you can contact Caliper Ingredients as well to support you with your project and program. And, you know, we really do look forward to seeing how this industry progresses as a safe, supported industrial space that can really provide true benefits for consumers. I love the counterpoint to Kathleen's point of view. So with that, before I sign off, I want to thank Keith Woelfel and Justin Singer. Thank you so much. And thank Caliper Ingredients, of course, for supporting. Yes. I want to thank you as a company for supporting this webinar with fantastic content, very informative. And I also want to remind everybody again that you can download the presentation information, and that you will also be able to view this webinar on demand and share it with your colleagues as well. It will be available on foodbeverageinsider.com within the next 48 hours. We'll also be emailing out a link to that to all registrants, and it will be available online for a year. So with that, I thank everyone for attending, and I want to encourage you all to have a wonderful remainder of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.